Welcome dear all. Now today we will be starting with History chapter number 1, Where, When and How, India and the Modern World. Earlier in 7th standard you have studied about the medieval period, and in the 6th standard you have studied about the ancient period. Now this modern world talks about the British history, where Britishers came into India and what struggle we Indians have to do in front of them so that we could get independent in 1947. How Europeans came to India as traders, how did the Mughal Empire broke up and the British conquest began, what was the time period where the Britishers were ruling over here, how the 1857, the very first war began, what was the revolt result, then the freedom struggle, and then in 1947 how India became independent. This is what we are going to study in this modern world. A brief introduction about what is modern world and how modern world became into an existence during the British period. The history of the country is divided into the ancient, medieval and modern periods. Over the last 2 years, you have been introduced to the ancient and medieval periods of Indian history. This year, you will learn about the modern period of Indian history. This is usually considered to begin with the conquest of India by the British, when the Britishers conquered India in the 18th century, extending till India became independent in 1947. However, this demarcation of modern history differs from country to country. Demarcation means dividing the time period or the gap when Britishers came to India differs, because in India it may be 18th century, in other country it may be another century where Britishers might have been went and ruling there. For example, in the 16th century, Europe was already on the threshold of the modern period, while India was still in the medieval period. So in India, during 16th century, we were still having medieval period, whereas in Europe, they started with the modern period. Now, what are the features of modern age? The modern age was a period of great and sweeping changes. Great and sweeping changes means it was a time period where so many changes took place due to the Britishers coming over here and ruling. These changes were the result of certain powerful forces. Forces means those Britishers, when they came into India, they forcefully do some of the unconventional work to the Indian people to be recognized as a characteristic feature of the modern age. Now coming to the features of modern age, the very first is industrialization. Industrialization, by the meaning only we come to know that when new industries came into existence and there was a bulk in production, we started producing more goods and other things due to the use of technology. This leads to the industrialization, the large-scale production of goods in factories using machines and power, because now we were in the modernized world, we could use the technologies which was there, which we were exporting from the other countries and importing as well. Urbanization, the movement of people from villages to towns and cities in search of a better quality of life. So during modern age, another feature was urbanization. People now started moving from villages to towns and cities so that they can get proper opportunities of job, they could get better quality of life. Then we had nationalism, patriotism and a growing identification with one's homeland. As people from another places like villages and towns, they were coming to India or coming to the urban areas, the feeling of nationalism, the patriotism feeling towards the culture was developing amongst them. So these were the features: industrialization, urbanization and nationalism. Another we have is democracy, government by the people. In the modern age also, we were having democracy where people were having their government electing representatives. Then we had socialism, a system where the state tries to ensure equitable distribution of wealth. So socialism means where you are giving each and every one equality amongst distributing the wealth. There is no discrimination among the people. Then we have scientific and technological process. New invention and discoveries that revolutionized human life. In the modern history or in the modern period, scientific and technologies were more and more introduced to the Indian people. So they started discovering new inventions and they revolutionized their human life with the new accessories. Then we have exploration. Because we had new technologies over here, they started searching new lands and sea routes, and so the exploration was also one of the feature of modern age. Another feature was humanism, a great concern for human welfare, dignity and values. People were also concerned about welfare of people, about the dignity, about the status of people, and they were quite humanitarian amongst another people also. So these were the features during the modern age. Now the forces of change. What were the forces that were responsible for the changes that characterize the modern age? Now we already have seen that during modern age we were well acquainted with so many things. We had industrialization, socialization, urbanization, exploration was there, scientific and technological process was there. But what was the main force that made the change in the modern age? They were the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, the American and the French Revolutions, and nationalism. Most of these forces of change began in Europe and then spread across the world. India too was greatly influenced by these forces. The very first force of change which we will be studying today is the Renaissance. Now what is Renaissance? The Renaissance was a movement that started in 14th century in Italy and lasted till 17th century. Renaissance means rebirth, and the thinkers of this period sought to rediscover and revive the learning of the ancient Greeks and Romans. The Renaissance gave rise to the scientific method of inquiry. That is learning by questioning, observation and experimentation. It encouraged people to think for themselves and question old belief and superstitions. In short, if I say, Renaissance was a rebirth which was given by the thinkers so that they could rediscover what the Romanians people and the Greeks people had already given to us. It gave to the rise where scientific method of inquiry was taking place. Some new experiments were done, some new observations were done, and this encouraged people to think for themselves and question whatever the beliefs were given by the ancient people. As we all know that ancient people had some superstitious belief in them. So what method of inquiry, the scientific method of inquiry, gave them a question to think upon whatever the beliefs were existing in the early age. So it encouraged people so that they can question themselves about the beliefs that they were holding in their mind. So Renaissance means rebirth or an inquiry into the scientific method where you are desperate to know the reason behind what you are believing already. Okay, so this was one force which brought a change in Indian people. They started thinking over that why the changes are taking place and why are we in so much depth believing about the old customs, old beliefs, and why are we not defining ourselves into the greater exploration of scientific methods. So this was the first force of change which made in the Indian people, and that was known as Renaissance, which also means rebirth given to themselves, inquiry of thinking about observation and experimentation. The second force of change was Industrialized Revolution. Now the Industrial Revolution was an economic revolution that started in Britain around 1750. Explorers like Vasco da Gama and Columbus had already discovered sea routes to the east and to the Americas in the 15th and 16th centuries. This led to the expansion in trade. Now because of Vasco da Gama and Columbus, because they discovered the sea routes to the east, this led to the expansion in trade. As the demand for more products grew, the old domestic system of artisans working at home with simple tools was replaced by the factory system. Now what is factory system? Earlier, people were domesticating goods at their home by using just simple tools. But now, because they were modernized and new technologies were coming from other countries, it was replaced to the factory system where machines were brought and now they could produce much more for the same products faster and at a fraction of cost. That means only at the little cost they could produce more, and the quality of production was also improved because of the industries. The Industrial Revolution completely changed the way people believed. One of the most important results of the Industrial Revolution was the growth of colonialism. Now please, this is very important. What is colonialism? The factories were producing goods on large scale. For these goods to be sold, a large market was needed. These factories also needed raw materials like raw cotton, iron ore and coal on a large scale. Very natural, when we are growing something or when we are manufacturing something, we need first the raw materials in hand. This prompted Britain and other European countries to search overseas for colonies as a market for the finished goods and the source of raw materials. So they were now in the search of colonies or a place where people could bring them raw materials so that they could bring that raw material and convert into the finished products and they could manufacture it as soon as possible. So these were the two forces of changes which took place in the modern age. First, we studied about the Renaissance. That means the force or the change which brought among the people, that they were mostly thinking about how they can change and why they had been believing into the old customs. And the second was Industrial Revolution. Because of Industrial Revolution, people have now converted themselves into the more modernized era, and they were utilizing some good quality product because it was manufacturing. The American and the